Imagine living in a constant state of stress and anxiety, feeling like you're trapped inside your own head with racing thoughts of worst case scenarios, and being fearful of making mistakes, over explaining yourself, and apologising for things even when you've no reason to. What if this wasn't just the stress of facing an immediate crisis, but rather something you experienced every single day? Well, this can be the impact of long-term exposure to emotional and psychological manipulation and abuse, because it can rewire someone's brain into a constant state of anxiety, risk assessing, and safety seeking behaviours. Because typically, whenever we feel anxiety, well, we tend to feel it in short bursts and appropriate to the situation. But the anxiety reduces as the crisis passes, or we're able to resolve it somehow. But for many people who have been in abusive relationships or environments, well, they've experienced ongoing threats, constant uncertainty, and psychological destabilisation. So in this video, I'm going to outline some of the manipulation tactics abusers use, how they create anxiety in people. Because whenever you recognise these tactics, whenever you know what's happening, it can be easier to protect yourself. So first of all, there's having someone doubt their perception of reality. This is commonly referred to as gaslighting. But this involves denying or twisting their victim's memories and experiences, leading them to question their sanity and their judgment. Now, this typically begins quite subtly. It could start with just finding flaws and discrepancies whenever the victim is talking, just to make them doubt themselves or lead them to believe that they aren't making any sense. But over time, the gaslighting intensifies to the point where the victim is kept in a state of confusion and uncertainty. And this can foster a generalized anxiety as they constantly second guess what is real or what's just being manipulated. Secondly, there can be an erosion of self-confidence and self-worth. And this manipulation usually involves insults, unkind humour aimed at humiliating, criticism, and name-calling. And it's all aimed at undermining the victim's self-confidence and self-esteem. They lead their victims to believe that they're worthless, inadequate, or they just don't matter, and their concerns aren't really worth listening to. And over a long period of time, some people might internalise their abuser's negative opinions and negative views. And this can result in anxiety around their own personal decisions, their experiences, their abilities, even their own value. Thirdly, there can be social isolation and loneliness. The abuser might use tactics like restricting or monitoring their victim's contact with any friends or family. They might even spread lies or gossip about anyone the victim has any contact with. They'll even induce guilt about any other friendships or connections. The victim will be accused of thinking more of other people than they do of their abuser. This can lead their abuser to set out ultimatums such as it's either them or me. And the victim might believe that that is their only choice, that there isn't room for other people in their lives. So they're left with the uncomfortable choice of having to make a decision between the manipulator and those who care about them. But commonly, the aim is to isolate their victims from any support networks, and the isolation can amplify their anxiety through fears of abandonment. It can also make them fearful of seeking help. And in the long term, this can foster an emotional dependency which is fueled by a fear of being abandoned by the abuser if they step out of line. Next, there can be the fear of repercussions. Coercive control often includes intermittent reinforcement. So as much as there are little rewards for compliance, there can also be rejections, threats, and anger. And this can put their victims in a constant state of alertness to their abuser's moods. On one hand, they're always hoping for positive reinforcement, but at the same time, they're also scanning for any sudden changes, whether that's in a tone of voice or even a facial expression, anything which could lead to potential danger. And this hypervigilance can lead to an ongoing anxiety, as even minor actions might trigger harm or an escalation in conflict. Moving on, there is induced guilt and shame. And this can include tactics such as victims being held to account for their abuser's moods and their actions. For instance, when the abuser reacts aggressively, a common phrase the victim might hear might be, "You made me do it." So their victims learn to tread very carefully. But there can also be accusing their victims of being overly sensitive, lacking intelligence or morality, or maybe not having a sense of humour for not being okay with being humiliated. And manipulative people can make it very difficult for their victims to say no by emotionally blackmailing them. It might lead them to believe that saying no, any kind of non-compliance, or even having boundaries at all, is an act of selfishness. In the long term, the victims might experience persistent anxiety and rumination over their perceived faults, having to navigate emotional minefields, and often being blamed for their own abuse. Number 6 is an invasion of privacy. Now, this could involve constant contact and the victim having to account for every moment they are not in the abuser's company. Constant questions like, where are you, what are you doing, who are you talking to, and why are you talking to them? So there is a pervasive sense of being continually watched and judged. Many victims who have been in abusive relationships have reported that they had to allow access to their private messages just to prove that they weren't hiding anything. Sometimes even have to allow themselves to be tracked using their mobile phones just to prove their whereabouts. So they lose any sense of personal space. There is constant scrutiny, constant interrogation, sometimes even having to give account of their own thoughts and feelings, and always having to prove their innocence. Number 7 is a loss of autonomy. And this can be whenever the abuser controls their victims through maybe controlling finances, resources, even controlling their decisions and their day-to-day routines. But it's usually done under the guise of how the abuser knows best. They are only trying to help. And this can have victims feeling trapped, helpless, and unable to escape the abuser's domination. Because when all the money, all the resources are being controlled, and every decision is being interrogated and rejected, well, this can make it difficult for a victim to do anything without their abuser's permission. Lastly, there can be threats of harm. The abuser might threaten to harm the victim, they might threaten to harm themselves, even harm other people. They might even threaten to destroy personal belongings and property. And they use these threats as leverage, again, leading the victims to believe that they are responsible for the abuser's actions. And this can induce an ongoing anxiety for their own safety, other people's safety, but also having to shoulder the moral burden of being held responsible for someone else's harmful behaviour. Now, prolonged exposure to these kind of tactics can cause responses such as intrusive thoughts, hyperarousal, and safety-seeking behaviours. The kind of responses that are commonly seen with PTSD, because the part of the brain that recognises and reacts to danger, the amygdala, well, that's working overtime in an environment where there were ongoing threats, attacks, accusations, and harsh judgment. So the body is being flooded with stress hormones like cortisol, and this can lead to a constant state of anxiety, fear, and hypervigilance. This is one of the reasons why people who have suffered abuse can still feel on edge and under threat, even when they're free from their abuser. It's because their brain has been rewired to watch for danger everywhere. So it is important to remember that anxiety, confusion, and the self-doubt that people feel, although it can be very distressing, well, they are actually normal reactions to abnormal behaviours. Abnormal behaviours such as relentless gaslighting, manipulation, and bullying. But the good news is that the human brain can change and heal. Just as it was rewired by abuse, it can also be rewired for recovery. Personally, I think that healing from emotional and psychological abuse can begin by rebuilding trust in the one person that you were gaslit into doubting. That's yourself. But if rewiring your brain for recovery is something you'd be interested in learning more about, let me know in the comments section. I'll put something together for you. But also, if there's been anything you found helpful in your recovery from abuse, if you feel comfortable enough, please share it in the comments section, because you just might help someone who is struggling as you once were. I'm Darren Magee. I hope you find this topic to be interesting. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. And until next time, thanks for watching.